he sent it over to Brian, but Brian hasn't responded yet, so that this is, he's going to talk a little bit. On this, things we need to include. Okay. Mike, do you know Brian's ETA? Okay.
The poor guy has to ride the ferry over and then fight the traffic that.
Okay.
Comes on the river ferry.
Do you want to call him and see how far he is?
Pretty reliable. We're all set? We're all set to go? Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Jaron Dagazinski and Bill Mahan, the chair and the vice chair, are both out of town. So like the New York Jets, you get the third string quarterback tonight. So we'll forge ahead. We have item on the agenda for approval of the minutes of the last meeting, which took place August 26th. Are there any comments on those minutes or a motion to approve from the regular board members?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Second? Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second on the minutes of the August 26th meeting. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All
I
right.
abstain.
We have 4 approval and 1 abstention, but that's enough to pass, right, Mike? Pass.
I abstained too, because I wasn't here.
Ah.
So if we have 2 abstention and only 3 votes in favor, which is not a quorum, is it still approved? I don't know the rules. Great, minutes are approved. Got it.
Me.
We have a list of public comment people.
Okay, people, nobody signed up.
You're limited to 3 minutes. Anyone would like to speak, please sign up.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
I don't think it's on, Mayor.
Not. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to speak up.
There is a button.
When now you can hear me. Okay, here we go. The button that has to be up, guys. Okay, so I'm Becky Erickson. I'm the mayor of the city of Paulsbo. I want to thank you. I want to say thanks to Mike for being the executive director of this organization and working really hard. And I want to thank all of you as volunteers to being on the board. I know it's sometimes a tough job, and so I'm very appreciative of your work. We sent a packet to you on Friday. It was late. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to digest all of it. But I want to, in order to move this process forward, I came and spoke to you last time about the need to phase projects, and I think that maybe that you heard that a little bit, and I think that you guys are headed in the right direction, which is to give money out in pieces for each project to be vetted in a very thorough way. We've already done a level of vetting for when we were looking at a YMCA. The PERC is not a YMCA. The PERC is something more than that. But we already know from the studies that we have done and paid for the value of that information, and that those kind of recreational opportunities in North Kitsap are appreciated to the point that people are willing to tax themselves for it. So the feasibility study is absolutely a good idea. The feasibility study at $60,000 for us is not, okay? It's not enough money. And the interesting part is I think it's very appropriate that you look at feasibility studies for all of these projects, or the 4 projects that you're really examining. But every project is going to be very different. They're all unique. So trying to do them in one kind of cookie-cutter way is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, how do you look at the feasibility for a very large building with athletic fields and compare that to the feasibility of a series of trails in North Kitsap, or a pool on Bainbridge Island? Those are very different projects. Or a private-public partnership in Port Orchard that involves our principal bank in the area. Those are all really different projects. So I think you have to do the feasibilities, but you're going to have to look at them independently. And the most important thing with the feasibility is, number one, is it going to pencil? In other words, are people willing to pay for it? Do they really want it? Do they really want it? And how are you going to go about constructing it? How is the partnership, how that's formed, how is that going to work? Who are the partners, and who's going to pony up the cash? All of those are very important questions, and they're different questions for each project, because the projects are so different. So I think you need to take that into consideration. One of the things that I think that's really, really important is that those partnerships be examined. I have said over and over again that a partnership is only as good as the weakest partner. And we've had some troubles in the past in the city of Paulsbo by joining partnerships, and that weakest partner has collapsed. So you need to understand what those partnerships look like, especially from a fiduciary sense. I have also been on the point where the city of Paulsbo was the weakest partner. In 2010, in the middle of the recession, we had made obligations to our Marine Science Center in Paulsbo that we couldn't keep. So please remember that. Part of that feasibility has to look at the partnerships, who all is involved. And then you need to start your bonding process. We're gonna end up doing some kind of bonding for this. The city will, or a Parks and Rec district, or something like that. How is that going to be structured? How does that work? I'd anticipated doing bonding in 2023, okay, with some kind of structure. That's the timing. But how does it really work? And so that feasibility is very important. We've put a proposal that's approximately 240. I frankly don't think that's enough money. I think it's going to be more than that in order to put those pieces together. But remember, we've said from the very beginning, this is a phased process. We want, $400,000 up front, and then we want another hunk, and then that final piece will be by the partnership, hoping the PFD will be in that third piece in order to build this project. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but
Time's about up.
In my time, okay, I'll cut it short. Yes, you need to do feasibilities. Every feasibility should be different because every project is different. And the most important piece of the feasibility is the partnerships and the funding mechanisms and public support. Keep those in mind. So thank you very much for your time, and please read this.
Yeah,
thing.
we just got this tonight, so.
Yeah, I know you're going to have to do your homework on it.
Thank you
so.
for your input. The $60,000 figure you quoted, is that based on what we gave the circuit in the
Exactly.
Northwest?
What I understood was initially, and my understanding, my understanding of the 60,000 was more of a market survey than a real feasibility study. Those are
Correct.
very different things. And feasibility is a big deal, a lot of components. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hi, I'm going to have a hard time following her. She sounded so smart. Oh, man. Well done. My name's Charlie King. I actually don't represent anybody, but I am speaking to you this evening as a passionate advocate for the replacement lap pool on the Bainbridge Island I will slow down and see if I can get my heart rate down. The Bainbridge Island Public District proposal for a replacement to the lap pool on Bainbridge Island. What I was really struck with the proposal was that it really very specifically spoke to the criteria that the KPFD put together. And what I really appreciated was that the criteria that you created for these proposals were very mindful of the financial impact, and it was a big investment. You had spoken to economic development, efficient use of public monies, innovation, and using it as a multi-use facility. From an economic development standpoint, there are so many targets that really speak to why this pool is so needed. We're working with a pool that is overutilized and way past its expiration date. It's like that gallon of milk that you look at and you're like, ooh, I'm not even pouring that in my coffee. The Parks District has distinguished that the Ray pool is so poorly, it's like such on the edge of collapse, like that systemic collapse, that they will continue to do whatever basic maintenance to keep it going, but they also know that any kind of a catastrophic failure will be the end of that pool, period. And it is a facility that is already overutilized, where the pool is opening at 5 in the morning and is open to practices in 10 o'clock at night, and it's booked most of every day. And as they say, you know, I'm not just a health club, you know, a men's hair club advocate, I'm also a member. Is I have a son who's a water polo player, and he practices until 10 o'clock every night, often just because that's when the pool is available for them. When you talk about an efficient use of public monies, the Parks District is not new to doing big projects like this. They have put together a really thoughtful proposal from this layperson's perspective, and really have done this kind of thing before, and they specifically came up with the 50-meter pool that they're talking about because it met the economic criteria, and it was the most efficient way to not only be able to create a new pool, but also be able to provide for the community and create economic benefit for not only the island, but also the county. Innovation, this is clearly demonstrated because the 50-meter pool that we're talking about would be only the second in the state. And the first one in the state was built back in the 80s and is overtaxed. That's my 3-minute timer. I will wrap up. But is overtaxed as it is. It is booked every weekend throughout the year. There is a demand that far exceeds its capacity, and it's an aging facility. So it has huge growth potential, not only on the island, but also in the rest of the county. It is a multi-use facility. It is good for lap swimming as it is water polo and dive. And I really appreciate you allowing me my 3 minutes, and thank you so much for your volunteering.
Thank you for coming. Have anybody else, Mike? I haven't seen the sign-up sheet, so. Anybody else in the public that failed to get their name on the sign-up sheet want to claim their 3 minutes? If not, we'll proceed. Thank you all very much. Financial reports, tax revenue, and monthly financial. Mike?
You have in your packet.
Can you talk into your mic?
Talk into the microphone. I guess there's not a volume control on this like there is on some of the others, so. The first part of the financial reports is the tax rebate summary, and you have a copy of that in your packets. As you can see, the amount received this month was $166,000, $166,341 and change. That's up 5.2%, which is more than twice the margin last month. So we are continuing to see a little bit of yo-yoing in the amount of increase over last year, but we have had only one negative month out of the 7 months so far. So,
And if a quick review is correct, that's the most we've ever taken in any calendar month ever.
it looks like it may be.
Good.
So yeah, I mean, that July or August rather has always been a strong month. But yes, that it does appear. I hadn't noticed that. Thank you very much, Walt.
Good job, Mike. Bringing in all that money. All right, how about the financial report?
Yeah, the other things that go on when that tax rebate check comes in from the state is $70,000 comes right off the top of that and goes into the 286 account for debt service. And at the end of November, they take a big whack out of the 286 account back into the Treasury account to pay the debt service on the bonds that were sold by the county back in originally in 2004, but then refinanced in 2011. So the net is, matter of fact, I didn't do the math on this one, but it's about $96,000 that goes into the 977 account as a adding to our cash reserves. The other financial reports that you have, there's two of them there. One is the activity and results from the 968 account, which is our operations account. Money is transferred in to pay our bills from month to month, and the total spent on that month was $14,500 and change. Second report that you have, which is the color-coded one, which shows you the active funds, and the one that's in green on the next to the last side is the 977 account, which is where the cash accumulation occurs. And as you can see, that balance at this point is about $2.7 million. Again, I'll remind everybody that we have a quote, commitment, unquote, to the Parks Department for a project yet to be finalized. So we have said we were going to do that, but there has been no call to utilize those funds yet. We are also in the process of paying off the Phase 2 funding for the Circuit of the Northwest project that was committed earlier in the year. We have paid off about 2/3 of that. However, I haven't received an invoice in the last couple of months. So I'm not sure what that activity is. We have received work product from that expenditure. I received drawings from Circuit of the Northwest that showed the track layout, the dirt that have to be moved, the sculpting that has to occur, and also the drawings for one of the major buildings to be built on that facility. So there is still work to be completed and still payments to be made on that.
That work product actually goes to the port, right? And we get it from them?
Correct. The invoices from the contractors go to the port. The port combines those into an invoice that they present to us, and we pay the port on those invoices.
Mike, how much was set aside for the Park District's turfing of the field?
For what? I'm sorry, Rick?
Turfing of the fields in the Park District.
Gordon Field. I think it's Gordon.
Yeah.
I guess it was the ballpark.
Actually, yeah, I think it's there. Initially, there was a question whether it was going to be applied to Gordon Field or to Lobie Field 1. They finally made up their mind, and it was to be applied to Lobie Field 1. So that was $500,000 out of what they thought would be a $2 million project. But we've not received any more concrete plans back from the Parks Department for that project.
Thank you.
The delay in the process was that they had to go out for grants from a variety of different state and federal programs that funded athletic fields, and they were filing those last year, and I think they find out the results sometime this year, but we haven't heard back from that yet, whether they've captured any grants for that field.
Questions from any of the other board members? Hey, Mike, I saw an email, I think since the last meeting, where you asked the county to invest, to move some money around so that
Correct.
we'd make better interest rate to invest it. Do you know what happens on this color-coded report when that money moves?
Let me see if I can decipher those transactions. It may not show up in here because the money effectively is still in that fund. For instance, I asked them to invest, I think it was around $500,000 or $400,000 from the 286 fund. Money is transferred in there from our receipts from the tax rebate at the rate of $40,000 or $70,000 a month. So after 4 months, there's $280,000 accumulated in there. So I asked them to invest that in the county investment account rather than just letting it sit there. It's not much better than sitting there because the rate of interest that it gets is about 0.4%.
Something.
But it's something.
So for purpose of this report, it stays in the same account.
And what
transparent.
you'll see is that there will be a line item for interest. And in that fund, and that's where that comes in. Let's see, 977, where is there a line item for interest?
Well, we don't need to thrash it out right here, but
Yeah.
I would be interested to know how that works.
Yes. And that excess or the cash in the 977 account, the bulk of that is invested in the state's investment fund. The one other thing that I'll note that because in the future I will be coming back to you to inform you when we have committed projects that we're going to bond or give money to pay invoices, even if it's out of the 977 fund for a feasibility account before we have a construction commitment. I will need to create additional funds with the Treasury Department so that I can control and monitor all the transactions on that specific project. Right now, there are 3 separate funds for the Conference Center, the Fairgrounds, and North Kitsap Regional Event Center, where I can transfer money for projects and pay the invoices for those specific projects out of those funds instead of out of the 977 fund. I will need to do the same thing for any projects that we commit money to, that I will create the fund with the Treasury Department so that we can, again, manage and track individually the performance of the funds and the money that we're paying them and what we're paying for.
Should we have set up a separate fund for the Circuit of Northwest because we've given them money, although not for construction?
Yes and no. Because that was through an ILA with the Port of Bremerton, it was, and we haven't committed construction money to Circuit of the Northwest. The board hadn't made a commitment to that. I did not create a separate fund for Circuit of the Northwest at that time. But it's something I could have done and perhaps should have, but that's done in of discrete lumps to the Fort of Bremerton. It's all carefully monitored and tracked, but yes, I could have created a fund for that, but because the board had not committed to a construction, finalized construction agreement on that project, I did not create a fund for that.
Okay. Any questions from board members? We have a blanket voucher
Yes, we do.
of $6,472.64. Like most of which is for legal services. Board members, I think you saw an advance copy. Any questions on this? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? All in favor of approving the blanket voucher, $6,472.64, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved. I'll pass this around for signatures.
Next item on the agenda is the bond counsel's professional services
We're on item
agreement.
5A, approval of the bond counsel agreement. Brian?
So in July, the board selected Foster Pepper as bond counsel. I prepared a legal services agreement, form that the PFD has used with its current counsel, Jameson Babbitt, with its predecessor counsel, Social Slaughter, and predecessor counsel, Lawler. I took that and I took the Foster Pepper proposal, put that as an attachment. There were two issues that came up in August, and I think one issue was the fee structure. Their fee structure solely contemplated that the PFD would issue bonds. County or worked with his partner. So I've since gone back and had discussions with Foster Pepper and restructured the fee agreement. So if the PFD does bonds, the original fee schedule works. If the PFD has others issue bonds, Foster Pepper is still doing work, but they're going to discount their work by 20%. If there's multiple activities in a year, so maybe the PFD issues some bonds, maybe the partner issues some bonds, further discount of 25% of their total fees, because there would be some duplication of effort. We have a particular circumstance where maybe in 1 year we do 3 or more funding events. Again, maybe 2 of our partners do some bonds and we do some bonds. Whatever the total amount of fees earned for each one of those accumulated and then discounted by a third. So they're acknowledging there would be some duplication. That was the main thing that I got adjusted into the fee agreement. And the second thing, looking at Foster Pepper's list of clients, they do work for the city of Bainbridge Island. They do work for the city of Paulsbo. They do work for the city of Port Orchard. They do work for the Port of Bremerton. They do work for the city of Bremerton. So we needed to deal with potential conflicts of interest. And so we structured the agreement to basically say, as long as they're doing unrelated work for any of those entities, that is not financial analysis, like if it's on their doing, advising on an employment issue or handling a land use case or something, whatever. As long as it's unrelated to our work, those were the two things that needed to get done. And they are done now. The agreement, the fee portion that I just mentioned is in section 2.1 at the top of page 2, and the conflict information is in section 3.2 on page 3. Other than that, the form that I'm asking you to approve is a form that you've approved before.
Say again where the fee structure is?
Sure. Well, it's top of page 2, section 2.1, called Method of Determining Fees.
So in your experience, the fee structure is reasonable?
I believe so. And before it was just unworkable. So, I mean, we had to contemplated the variety of different ways that the
And are you recommending our approval of this?
I am recommending, yes.
Comments or questions from any other board members for Brian? If not, is there a motion for approval of this bond council agreement?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the legal representation agreement with Foster Pepper.
Second.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, Brian. The agreement is approved.
One comment that I might make, and there was a footnote on their agreement which indicates that Foster Pepper becomes Foster Garvey after October 1st. Merger between two firms, and their name will change 1st of October.
Hope nothing dire happened to Mr. Pepper.
Anticipate.
Okay.
Wanted to make you aware of that because This probably won't get signed because Aaron's out of town until after October 1st. Actually, Brian, I did make a note on the October 1st would be the date it would become active.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Board members, in your packet, you have a draft RFP for a feasibility study that Mike has drawn up and I think has given to Brian for review, but as I understand, that review has not been completed. Is that correct?
I read it very briefly.
And we may hear some discussion here tonight that will cause us to need to reword some of that. Anyway, Mike, do you want to brief us on what's in the draft RFP?
Yeah, as I mentioned, and as there has been some feedback from Paulsbo, and I expect that we'll also hear from Cole when he addresses feasibility studies for his project, Heritage Park, that I was trying to look at an approach in formulating this that could be applied to more than one project, because all of these projects are in Kitsap County. They are all dealing with similar demographics. They're all dealing with the same economy in Kitsap County. So there were some limitations that said maybe a single consultant could take all of those common factors and utilize those in looking at the projects, understanding that each of the projects are different and there will be different either market conditions or different usage, different community interactions, et cetera, that may affect the outcome, but perhaps that we might get some economies of scale of having a consultant utilize all the common factors in analyzing 3 different projects, knowing that you're going to get 3 different results. I was not looking for a cookie cutter analysis, but to use common factors in wherever possible in doing the analysis and addressing the aims and goals and aspects of each individual project individually. That may or may not be possible, but that was the approach I was trying to take. This could result in 3 different feasibility studies, each defined individually, or it could result in 3 different feasibility studies with a common part of each of the 3 feasibility studies. If they're so dramatically different, we could wind up with 3 feasibility studies with 3 totally different consultants that deal in those respective fields. In forest and trail recreation as opposed to more common field recreation that may be associated with the Paulsbo project. So this was an attempt to at least, again, like Brian has done, a common structure around which he's doing his ILAs. This could be at least a common beginning point for defining what the feasibility studies are going to be. I do recognize that some of these, because they are public projects, have a different model in what they do in order to justify the final result of what factors they choose in which to commit to a project. And I agree that both Paulsbo and Heritage Park has done an extensive amount of previous studies in both the North Kitsap Regional Event Center as well as what Heritage Park has done on its previous steps in its project. So today was just to present that framework to you, to hear what your response is to a common economic factors approach or the ability to try to put any 1 to 3 of the projects together in some envelope under a single consultant. That is not practical, and we won't do it that way. I just wanted to get it started because all 3 of these projects are looking for commitments from us, and what I've heard from you is that you're not prepared to make any upfront commitments until you have a better view of what the possible prospects of these projects is going to be.
What I think I'd like to do is I'd like to have a board discussion about that issue, but I think what we're going to hear from the mayor of Port Orchard and what we're going to hear from Cole on the Heritage Park project would perhaps influence our discussion. So I'd rather put that off until we've heard from both of them and then take up, if we're able, I'd like to be able to give you and Brian some guidance on how we want to proceed to get contractor or contractors on board for a feasibility study so that we don't, admire the problem for X more months.
Okay?
Comment from the board members on this particular subject? If not, we'll come back to it after we've heard from a couple of other folks and then have a discussion about it. Okay with you all?
Yes.
Okay, we have an update on the draft ILA with Port Orchard. Mayor, thank you for coming again.
Yeah, it appears the microphone's on. So thanks for having me here this evening. And at your last meeting, we talked about us taking a first shot at an ILA, draft ILA, and we heard some testimony or comment and testimony from Kitsap Bank and from the developer. I think I have Kitsap Bank here again tonight, and representatives from the developer again, if you've got additional questions about that. Any of their pieces of this, and I think we're calling this now Attachment B, which is the tasks and deliverables that, and based on the discussion we had a conversation at the last meeting, you guys wanted to see these further broken down, and now they're broken into 8 tasks. There's a new task in here that, as it's likely this is 3 and I hope not 5 years from the day we actually break ground on this project. We also put an alternative in there for financing that in here at task number 6. And at that point, we're looking for a commitment. If you're in a position and you have the best rate and best alternative to package this funding with other bond issuance, great. And if not, then we think there's an alternative where you're pledging the cash flow, and that one of the partners in our project steps forward and issues that bond, because it's 3 government agencies. So we broke what was task 1, which is now tasks 1 and 2, to break your, whether we call it a market study, feasibility study, whatever that is, that you guys are controlling that first piece. But as we spoke to previously, it's imperative that we, have this this global commitment to this, and that's where your draft ILA, where we've made, you know, substantial changes to that. If we agree, you agree, and the partners agree as we go through each one of these steps, you know, we're checking in. Yes, it makes sense. The feasibility, we're moving on to step 2, and then step 3, and so on and so forth. And if it doesn't make it sense at any of these points, then obviously I hope we don't. But there's an option to pull the plug for any of the partners. So with that, Chris. You know, we thought it was going to take 6 months. I said I'd get it, and we head back to you in 2 weeks, and hope to continue to get this hammered out.
Mike, we have this red line version, and the red line part is the responses from the city of
Correct.
Port Orchard.
Correct.
And Brian, have you seen that yet?
I have, yes.
You have any comments on the changes that they want?
I have 6 kind of general comments. You want me to run through them? First one's kind of a small thing, very curable. I don't find attachment A, which is the project summary, which is one of the 2 attachments we asked them to create. That's comment number 1. Again, very fixable. Comment number 2 is the level of commitment. As we drafted the ILAs, they were contemplating more of a phased approach. How this document's changed to, it's really a full all-in proposal. They changed the last recital, they changed section 6. So it just needs a deeper level of commitment than preliminary ILA to kind of understand the project better. Which leads to my 3rd comment. At some point, as we get deeper in the process with all of the partners, we're required to do the Department of Commerce review under RCW 36100. We haven't really had to do that so far at the stage of just looking into feasibilities of doing projects. But with this more larger commitment, Mike and I have started to have a discussion like, well, so is this the time now that we need to go to the Department of Commerce because we're committing to a really big proposal, lots of steps and lots of dollars attached to it. So that's a question, and I think it's a question we need to answer if we're going to go forward on this. Funding level, you've seen the Port Orchard is making an affirmative request for $12 million, which is, again, way more than a feasibility analysis. Look at the project and go forward. Comment number 5 is their Schedule B agreement task is very, very detailed. Kudos for that. I'm not competent to evaluate if those are the right tasks, and I don't know if Mike is, but I think if we're going to go down the path of agreeing to all of those tasks, we probably need to drill down on those tasks and make sure they're my last item, and again, this is very fixable, it's just a comment, it's not a all ILAs need a term, that's in section 10. We didn't put a term in, we just created the structure that says here's the term, and there's a blank for that. So we're kind of requesting partners maybe to come back, or maybe we're going to sit down across the table and decide what the term is, but that is still blank, whereas City of Paulsbo, for example, they put a term in their return on the ILA of December 30, 2020 or something. So whatever we're committing to in that ILA sunsets at a certain point in time. We'll still need to do that here as well. And then also in section 10, we generally put in a early termination clause that allows, because of changes in circumstances or whatever, allows the PFD or the other party to upon proper notice, terminate the relationship. And I think that was taken out of here. I
Was taken out by whom?
These
by
were
the
all of
city.
our edits, yeah.
That was redlined by Port Orchard.
Yeah, by our attorney.
I wouldn't advise that. So those are my quick comments.
I can address some of those. And the concern is if we're committing to the menu of items on here, because
Yeah, my question was,
how-
if we agree to some form of this, are we committing $9.5 million? To the
to
city?
12, actually, it's 12 million. Then the last step is $9.5 million. Correct. And so to have a clause that says because I don't like the new mayor in Port Orchard, we're going to cancel this agreement with 30 days is, we've got something we're trying to build here.
Really wouldn't say.
Yeah, I don't think it, well, I realize that, but I'm being fictitious.
Well, yeah, you have to understand that's not going to be arbitrarily done. Take this step forward, we're going to be partners, which means we're going to be talking to each other all the time.
So
And if that kind of a decision is made, it's going to be made by both partners because both agree that the project can't go forward in its current form. So,
and I'm not the city's legal counsel, so I think there's a way to get there, but we had concern with that language. One thing, an observation too, we've got all these steps. These are estimates, as your attorneys pointed out. We're going to need probably a professional consultant to look at all these tasks, and we could find out the first one's 150,000 and the next one's 400, or $200,000. I think there needs to be somehow written in this agreement too, some flexibility. The total commitment isn't going to increase. There probably needs to be flexibility in the dollars in the various phases not to exceed the total commitment.
Well, it seems like what we need to do now is, Brian, you need to go back to the city of Port Orchard with our response to their comments and see if we can iron out some of those things. We need to get a copy of this to Broer to look at it from the construction practical standpoint. Other board members have any comment?
So on previous ILAs, at the point that we're at right now, as you mentioned, Brian, about this is not just for the feasibility studies. This is actually for the whole part and parcel, correct?
Right. Generally, that's correct. And generally, if we're going down that pathway, the ILA has a lot more Bremerton for the conference center, or for County for the overhauls. If the sense of the board is that the board would want to go all in, as I'll phrase it, then I think I would come back to you and say, what do we want the ILA to look like at the end of the process?
in those projects, we actually wound up doing funding ILAs that were follow-on to a general ILA. Are you proposing that we do a more overarching ILA that would include what a funding ILA would do, as we've done in the past with other projects?
Jumping back in time, because it's been a long time since the board was in this position. Back in the beginning, we didn't do a preliminary ILA and then a big ILA. We just sat down and did the big ILA. And so again, if you go back and look at those early ILAs, it's just a lot more substantive. Reflects the level of financial commitment and the standards that the BFD established.
So the IL,
We've kind of gone on a different pathway more recently with saying project, but we're not 100% invested in it. And so we're doing these preliminary ILAs that kind of set the scope of some level of participation for
The ILA that we have with the Port of Bremerton for the Circuit of Northwest, that was just for the amount of funding.
That was a
There's no
very
commitment on
preliminary-
that.
yeah. Not making a final commitment. There's multiple places in that LA that says, there's no continuing.
Have other ILAs out that address that same way? I mean, like the 500,000 we've got for Lobie Field is part of a more substantial ILA, correct?
So since we did, a very large ILA with the county, 15 years ago, as the county has come back and asked for more funds for this project, for that project, we kind of update the original ILA, kind of supplement it. We incorporate much of the original ILA, and we kind of add what the new features are.
Yeah, I'm beginning
This is
to
all
understand.
new to many of you.
We merely worked with what was sent to us. So,
No, I understand. And this is me
if there's a
learning.
different forum we need to work with, we'll get it done. And would certainly hope we can have some back and forth before the next board meeting. And we got this, to staff 2 weeks ago, and it would have been nice to know those concerns, or there were concerns, sent to our legal counsel, and we could have worked through some of this. I do want to, stress too the sense of urgency that we have. We've got a development project that won't be around, and it could potentially not be around if we wait and just do a feasibility study and don't commit, make a global commitment to this. There's an opportunity to pull back from this if feasibility study or any of these steps say it doesn't work. But there is urgency to the request, and I think I've conveyed that at the last board meeting. So.
Yeah, you've been very clear.
I know that the mayor and the project leads are interested in seeing something happen as rapidly as possible, and perhaps it's time for their lawyers and our lawyers to sit down at a table and talk about these things instead of sending a piece of paper and then marking it up in red and sending it back, and they mark it up in red and send it back. Maybe by sitting down in a room together as partners, that we can accomplish a lot more, a lot faster.
Look forward to that meeting.
Board members, you have a response to that?
Whatever works for the
You have any
attorneys.
objection to that? We could admire all these projects. I think we owe it to all the project submitters, to move ahead and not just, trade paperwork back and forth ad nauseum. But on the other hand, I think I, for one, am not willing to commit to $12 million when I haven't seen anything yet about feasibility. So, but as you point out, as long as the ILA has, an escape clause of some kind, depending on the results of the feasibility.
And our attachment B clearly states that, and if
Yeah,
it needs to be
I
modified,
agree. I
that
agree.
if the feasibility says it doesn't work, and we don't advance.
Well, in the same manner that we had dealt with the Parks Department, granted that's on an existing project.
I needed Rick to shut off his phone. Start over again.
In the same way that we worked with the Parks Department to advance commit some money to a project, granted that's with an existing facility, with an existing agreement and all of the things in place where we could do that. My question to the board is there any level at which you would be willing to make a commitment conditional on all of the other steps being completed in order to justify that spending of that money? It's not all going to get spent at once. It's going to be doled out over time against invoices, just like we're doing with the Circuit of the Northwest. So $12 million is not the number you're willing to commit to. Is there a number that you are willing
I
to
think, again, speaking for myself, there's not a number until we nail down how much we can bond and all of that. I'm not willing to commit to give everything that Port Orchard needs before we give anything that the other two projects need.
And that's the one alternative that I put in there. I think we heard that from a cash flow standpoint, you had $40 million to pledge, and that's why we put that provision in there of pledging cash flow if that's the best alternative. And I think then with us being the top project, and if you're going to fund the top 3 or 4 projects, we should be darn close to at the dollar amount we're asking for.
I have a question for Brian. You mentioned that if we were to go all in, that there's a different version of the ILA that has more in-depth provisions. If we were to agree to the $12 million in this case, does it require a significant rewrite of this document, or would you opt to use the one that has deeper provisions?
I would stay with this form and then probably go back and pull out of earlier forms the substantive provisions that I think the PFD would want and would need. So it's not a significant rewrite. It's a couple hour cut and paste sort of thing. That'd be my preference, not to go back and start all over again.
So would that look similar to what we did with the Lobe Field that way? So there'd be basically amendments to it?
I thought I heard Tom's question as being, could we construct an ILA that would cover the whole project? And so my answer to Tom was yes, we could. We'd have to go back and meld one of our early ones that has more substantive in it to this current one. Your question is more like, are we going to be doing amendments? And I'm sorry, I'm not tracking that.
No, okay, I didn't, I guess, so what Tom's was, would we look at this 12 million in this first amendment?
Yeah.
How the question was going, whether we were going to go back to the basic amendment and then add on the dollar amounts, or whether we're looking at one amendment, I'm sorry, one ILA for the whole project. So we're talking one ILA. Okay. Talked myself into it. Got it.
Okay, so we're good?
We're good. Sorry. Yep.
Okay, Mike, let's do two things. Let's set up a schedule so that Brian and the city's legal counsel can, as the mayor suggests, get together face-to-face, and we can stop swapping red line versions of corrections and changes and one thing and another, and agree on a format that has the $12 million in there, but gives us a clear exit strategy if the feasibility study doesn't yield positive results. The other thing is to get the draft over to Brewer and let him,
I think there's
not the ILA, but the consulting.
I think it's going to need more than just the 2 attorneys to do that. I think we're going to need participation from at least a board member, and
Okay,
some other administrative person as well as a legal person in order to watch what those limits are.
Really the 2 teams, the PFD team and the city team, whoever is on there.
I agree. As the third in command, I'd prefer not to designate which of the board members will do that, and wait till Darren gets back and he can decide which, if any of us, he wants to do that. But we need to set the wheels in motion so that we don't slow down here from inertia.
And if we got,
Contact Broer in order to get him involved so that he can start looking at the,
Is there a draft of attachment A somewhere?
we'll create one. And I get the ask on your side, but if we could get, before we met, if there's some significant language that's going to get added to this, if we could get that over in a potentially a red line version, accept the versions of what's acceptable and let us know what's not acceptable in here that we have to work on, and then you're saying there's some paragraphs that need to be added, get those over to us so that we can have a productive meeting when we first sit down, and we'll get the, attachment A whipped out quickly on our side.
And when Darren returns, you turn to him, get together with him and let him decide who he wants to, from the board, 1 or 2 board members to sit in on the session when we get it scheduled. Keep this thing on the tracks.
I have a question. I didn't catch, Mayor, the 12 million is not the total that you're asking for.
It is the total that we're asking
Is it?
for, but in 8 or 9 tasks, it's 8 tasks.
Which of your other partners are committing money at this point?
That's part of, I think it's task 3, is to determine the partners and the level of commitment. In the perfect world, I think we're going to manage this project. The port has property that hopefully they're contributing, and the county's our bonding partner. We haven't formalized, that's not in writing yet, but that's be my perfect world. And then we're going to need, this $20 million project, so that we're going to have to, between the state capital budget, grants, probably a Parks and Recs levy, but we've got to go through a process for our community for that too. So there's a lot of steps.
The 3 public partners are the city, the county, and the port.
Correct. We've all passed resolutions of support as public partners. All 3 entities have. And if we're not all in, then we don't have 3 partners. We have 2 partners, or until that agreement. That's one of these tasks in here, is drawing up that formal agreement and what are the contributions.
I got a real quick question for you too. So for the feasibility study, you're looking for the PFD to pay the entire amount, or?
That was our ask, yes.
Okay. It says down here for the PFD's portion is in here. And when were you guys looking to start the feasibility study?
Well, as soon as we can get an agreement. Tomorrow would be nice, but I don't think we're going to get the agreement done that quickly.
I guess.
And you guys are going to have to hire you wanted to control that process, hire the consultant.
That's
You've got a
Right.
RFP process.
What would stop us from just doing an ILA for the feasibility study without, we can at least see where that is without worrying about the rest of the 12 million?
Very little. I mean,
With the port, correct?
Right, we did it with the port, and again, the template that we were using with Port Orchard and Paulsbo and Kitsap County all really are more suited to going forward on a feasibility study basis than the whole project. So I think what we have is pretty adaptable to, what we've already proposed is very adaptable to study. For example, the City of Paulsbo's draft that we got Friday it has taken on that concept. So while they talk about the whole project, the purpose of the ILA, as the City of Paulsbo has responded to us, is really funding for about $250,000 for feasibility studies. We're meeting with the county on Thursday morning, and we'll kind of have discussions with them again about where they think they want to go on this and how to structure it. So again, I think if it's an easier get to the result, get signature on the paper if it's more focused in terms of a feasibility analysis ILA.
But remember, my challenge is I have a $120 million master plan project, and this task takes 9 to 12 months, and we're doing a study on something, and we get to the end of it, it may not exist because the project fell apart. That's why we're looking for that commitment, so that the developer will move ahead with the $120 million project, and then the feasibility study works. We do a study and we don't have a project. We spent money on a study for a project that didn't come to fruition.
Like it would make more sense to fund the feasibility study up front and then worry about the rest of it if that pans out, since that's kind of a.
Well, I think what we're hearing, though, is that doesn't work for the city of Port Orchard.
The project likely won't, if we don't get a commitment and the project doesn't move forward, we're studying something that likely won't come to fruition. That's the rub.
So you're looking for a commitment to the project, assuming a favorable feasibility.
Yeah, assuming at every one of these steps that when we check in, this thing works. You know, and I think with a $120 million master plan project, I find it hard to believe that the feasibility, it's not feasible, that it isn't, it's probably going to work. We're going to have 150 jobs, housing associated with it, and you know, there's a component from a funding part on ours. If we can't raise the other portion of it, once again, we've funded a study and probably, you know, and done steps 1, 2, and probably 3, but we haven't gotten beyond that because we still have to raise the rest of the capital on our side. You're out nothing other than the studies and the things you're already likely talking about funding if we don't deliver.
Other comments from board?
I have comment. I don't know why we're asking for a feasibility study at all for this project. If the partners are committed to do the project, what is the question of whether it's feasible?
I don't think the other partners are yet committed. That was one of your concerns, is you've got to get those commitments.
That's a later task. Your concern is the financial viability of the project, and it's $20 million in public money between your contribution and ours. It's probably it probably is a good step, but I just don't want to do a study to put it on a shelf. I want to have an outcome, you know, working towards an outcome.
Yeah, nor do we. You know, we don't want to fund 3 or 4 feasibility studies and never shovel dirt. So, Mike and Brian, are you clear on what we want you guys to do?
I believe so. I'm hearing there's some balancing that needs to be done between what the city's objective is and protecting the PFD's commitment.
Correct. Yeah. But rest assured, Mayor, you guys came out number 1 in our ranking thing, so we're going to get something done.
I look forward to working with you.
Even though the conference center came out number 1 in 2002, but there were 4 different feasibility studies that were done on that project before that they committed the $7 million out of the bonding that was sold in 2004.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Oh, Cole Medina on the Heritage Park project.
Good evening, everybody. Board members, Mike, thanks for having me here tonight. I appreciate you guys giving us a few minutes. I was hesitating a little because Mike's pulling up some slides that we provided, and I gave you guys a copy. You have it in front of you also. While he's pulling that up, obviously I'm just here to talk about our project. I'm representing the Kitsap County Parks Foundation and Kitsap County itself, since there's no one else here from the county tonight. I don't know exactly where we're at on the ILA with the county because I'm not involved in that. Brian is working directly with county attorneys and county staff on that. But I know that a point will come where we won't know we parties, Brian and the county's attorneys, won't know what to include in that ILA until you all have made a decision. I mean, really, Brian can sit down with them and talk all he wants, or send paper back and forth, but until the board's really made a clear decision on what it wants to fund, I don't think you can complete that task. And I really appreciate the difficult situation that Mayor Patansu's in, of saying he just can't move forward with this without a $12 million commitment. And he's asking for an ILA that includes a statement that you'll pay for a feasibility study, and if that feasibility study is positive, you will definitely provide the additional funding through to the end. And I absolutely understand why you're asking for that. That's what you need. But that's a decision, and I think until you guys make that decision, I don't think there's any magic Brian can pull out of this. I'm just trying to fill time till I get the slides up here, offering my thoughts on what we were just watching. I know you have the slides in front of you, but it'd be nice if people in the audience could see it too. Okay. So in a second here, hopefully I'll get started with our presentation. And then I'm going to hand off the baton, as I have in prior presentations, to Connie Record. Connie is a landscape architect who's just volunteering her time on this. She's just one of the members of the community who's trying to make this happen. You having any luck over there, Mike?
Are we getting any closer there, Mike?
Okay.
Would a 5-minute break help you recover from your technical insufficiency?
It looks like you're losing your board members too. You guys want a break?
Let's take a 5-minute break while we solve the technical problem.
Okay, I'll be back.
I apologize to the audience.
Seconds to warm up.
40 million.
tab is
Okay. As I was saying, I'll get through a few of these slides, and then Connie Record will take over for me. I'll just,
Yeah, we've got it
Yes.
on the computers.
if you don't mind, I'll just wait till Rick gets up there. I just feel weird talking with you walking around behind me. Okay, so we just wanted to touch on a few points. Those points are listed there. Basically, the point we want to make to you is we've been on this journey with you since December, as you all have been trying to figure out how you want to spend the PFD's money. And you've had a number of different options for doing that you've brought up, especially over the last couple months. One option is you just go all in on one or more projects and fund them in a big way. Another option is you maybe do that later, but in the time being, just do some smaller funding of projects to kind of get some quick wins and get something going with this money. And another option you've been talking about is let's do some feasibility studies on all the projects and see how they all line up and compare with each other. So I wanted to let you know that this project's amenable to all of those things. Whichever way you decide to go with the funding, you can fund this project using any of those methods. That's really the main point that I wanted to give you. So would you mind going to the next slide, Mike? I wanted to start with the dollars. The first part of that, the 11 million, it's a little more than that, but 11 million I'm rounding off for the land purchase and some miscellaneous improvements that have already been made. That money's been raised. It's been raised by the county, other government agencies, the community, thousands of donors. We've already spent that money. We own the land. We control the land. So it's the next parts where the PFD could come in. What we, of course, hope is that the PFD would be willing to fund the big number, the $14 million number there, and fund what we called in the application Phase 2, which would include building the ride park, building the Sound to Olympics Trail, getting the master plan and the economic feasibility study done, and then a whole array of other park improvements. So of course that's our biggest hope, and building all of those things at once will have the biggest bang for the buck in terms of tourism and dollars brought into the county. But if that's not the way the PFD goes, then there are pieces of this that you can fund right now. The top one on the list for us is the ride park. I'll point out that in our original materials to you, we had an estimate for the ride park in there at $2 million, and you'll see it's quite a bit lower now, $775,000. And the reason why is 9 months have passed since we put together that application back in December. We've now engaged with it's a nonprofit company, but a nonprofit that will be actually building the ride park. They've gotten down into the weeds of it. They've done a finer design of it. They're going through permitting, and we've realized that we can get it done for a lot cheaper. So in the proposal in December, we were aiming high because we didn't want to have any surprises later, and now we've dialed it in, and that's the number for the ride park now. So that's a piece we could just pull out, and you guys could just fund part of that now. I know that's a bigger number than you're talking about, but if you were able to fund, that whole ride park can be built in phases. So you could maybe be interested in funding a third of that, and you could get a third of the ride park built now, starting next year. It doesn't have its permits yet, but it's going through that process, and we expect the permits in a timely manner. And I'll also add that we now have $120,000 from Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. that they've raised for this project. So they got $120,000 they're putting towards it. You could put money towards it, all of that or a portion of it, and build as much of that ride park as you want. In terms of the master plan and the economic feasibility study, Connie's going to go into that in much greater detail. But a couple points I wanted to make to you about it. There's this term economic feasibility, and to your point, Rick, why do we need to do an economic feasibility study? Doesn't it seem feasible? And I think there are two different types of studies we're talking about: economic feasibility to determine if a project's actually just feasible to do, and a market study to determine what the impact of that project will be in the community. Will the public use it? Will they pay for it? Will it generate money in the community? Both of those things are built into what is item 4 for us. So that $350,000, that includes both economic feasibility and market study. But we have to tie those together. But I can tell you that the ride park and the Sound to Olympics Trail are absolutely feasible because we own the land. We already own it. We control it. And for the STO, we've done final design work on it. We know we can do it. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Well, while he's doing that, I have a question about the ride park. You mentioned that you could fund part of it. So if you raised $500,000, you would be able to apply that $500,000 and have the desired outcome, or do you need the entire $775,000?
Great timing. The next slide has on it, if you can see in your packet there, it's hard to see up there, but the design of all the trails currently planned for the ride park. A nice thing about trails is you can build as many of them or as few of them as you have the money for. To build all of those, we're looking at about $750,000 or $775,000. But we could just build half of those or a part of those as an initial phase. And in fact, EMBA, Evergreen Mountain Bike Association, who we're working with on this, their suggestion is that we build it out over 2 years, build one half 1 year and one half another year. And there's a certain season of the year, basically the fall and winter, when you want to do the building. So build one half, build it over 2 years. So it could be funded that way. So that was just going to make that point. That was the point I was going to make with this slide, is you could just phase it out and build some of the trails now and some trails later. Could you go to the next slide, please? And then the STO trail, that's a bigger price tag, $7.5 million. And that's based on some real design work. There's a very long 100-plus page study in the materials we gave you guys back in December. That also can be built in phases. You can see, it's hard to see on here, but it's divided into 3 phases, even in the design work that was done on it. So that could be built in 3 phases as well if you want to not give out the whole $14 million now and you're interested in funding something in smaller chunks. Our top choices are fund the whole $14 million. That'd be great. If not that, ride park is next, and then STO, and then the master plan and the feasibility study. And what might make sense is some combined funding that includes the master plan feasibility study and getting some dirt moving. Doing some funding for the ride park at the same time as you're providing some feasibility market study money. So I'm going to turn it over to Connie now. Thanks, Connie.
I'll just kind of pick up where he's left off. The other component that we've included into that $14 million price tag is what we're calling park improvements. And that's pretty much everything that's happening outside of the STO and the ride park. Those can be prioritized to support different pieces of the ride park and or the STO. They would be integrated into the larger park plan. These things are things like restroom buildings and picnic shelters and parking lots, the utilities, the infrastructure that's needed, connector trails, viewpoints, wayfinding, interpretive signage, all the kind of the amenities that will make this whole project sing. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk mostly about the master plan process and where that, I'm going to call it a market study because that's probably a little bit more accurate to what we need to do for this project. And this slide is intended to show generally the process of the master plan effort. And really what it's intending to show, you can see right in the middle in the red letters there, is that market study is really integral to the whole planning process. It's going to be a very difficult thing to try and do up front. The reason is, again, sequentially, we start the visioning process. We make sure that the public and the staff are all on board with what this project is going to entail as part of the master plan. Then we do a pretty comprehensive site inventory and analysis. You're aware of the obvious things. We look at the critical areas, the topography. We look at some of the existing improvements that are there, but we're also looking at the constraints on the land. There's a lot of different parcels that have been acquired over the years, and there's some restrictions on what you can and can't do. We look at the surrounding influences. There's a lot going on up north in Port Gamble that is going to have a direct influence on this, and will have an influence on what decisions we make about where to site some of these other amenities. We look at drainage and views. You don't want to have a viewpoint where you don't have a view. Pretty obvious stuff, but it's a very important part of the process. The next piece are the concept alternatives. You can take that information and with your program, your range of program elements, you can look at 3, 4, 5 different alternatives. And these are the bubble diagrams, the massing studies, the adjacency studies, organizing things in a way that makes sense and makes them constructible. Right in there is the market or feasibility study, and I'll get to that and the details of that in a minute. After the concept planning and the feasibility study, you finally arrive at your preferred plan. That is your master plan. And from that, you can develop an implementation plan. You know what each piece is going to cost. You have a pretty good idea of how it should be phased and what those phases cost. And you can continue to do what Cole has described is continue to build this project, build onto that 14 million with the next phase of work that will occur. And then the last item was public outreach process. That's last actually because it's throughout the entire process. It starts at the very beginning and goes through to the end. So I think unlike some of the other projects, this one, as Cole said, it isn't really, we don't really need to show that it's feasible. The land is owned. There's been a feasibility study and an alignment study for the STO. The ride park is in permitting. It's very doable. And it's gotten a lot of support from the public. The market study needs to be done to determine what is the appropriate type and level of development that will maximize tourism and make this facility self-sustaining. That's really the goal. If you take a look in your packet, you'll see that there's some development scenarios, and those are the things that we want to zero in on and look at. There's something called a base camp, which is, do we just do camping and cabins and yurt development? Is that what's going to be most effective to attract tourism and to support the ride park and the trail? Do we step it up a notch with a signature destination that might include lodging and conference facilities and dining facilities? Or do we bump it up yet again and take a look at what we're calling an eco destination, something that has a very strong environmental focus, and maybe it even has an environmental learning and research center? So we don't really know which of those things that's beyond the $14 million project, are the most appropriate for this project. That needs to happen when we understand the carrying capacity of this land. We're not going to fully build out 3,500 acres. We're going to be very selective about what can be built and where. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide is kind of intended to show, on the left, it shows something that for those who are very visually oriented, which Cole can attest, I am that. The graphic on the left is one of those concept alternatives. Again, kind of bubble diagrams and loose understanding of what the sizes of various things are. And in order to get to the preferred plan, we really do need to understand what the market study is going to tell us about how to develop that preferred plan. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So the graphic that's on the left is actually something that was in your in the original application packet, and that describes those things that I just described: the base camp, the eco destination, the signature destination, and the other graphics are just intended to show the kinds of things that will be in a market study. This market study will tell us. It'll evaluate what program elements have the best chance for success so that we're not just guessing when we're putting all these pretty graphics together. It's going to identify the best and the highest use for this site. It will help us to right size the facilities so we aren't underbuilding or overbuilding things like parking lots, lodges, numbers of cabins, camping facilities, that sort of thing. It'll also identify some financing strategies to both build and maintain this thing that we have built. That's where, in the future, we would expect maybe the PFD continues to be a partner, but there's also going to be public and private partnerships to build, to get to full build out on this. And the market study is going to inform that phasing plan, what makes sense, first, second, and third. Last slide. So really, as Cole had mentioned, this project is really made up of a number of smaller projects that are infinitely scalable. And depending on where the PFD goes with final decisions about how to grant some of this money, we are very flexible in that. But this project does consist of some that are already underway. There is a project, the ride park is in permitting. There is a plan that is on the, kind of on the shelf and ready to go for the STO trail. So the goal, I think, is to try and achieve as much as possible as soon as possible, because as we all know, construction is not going to be getting cheaper next year and the year after. And to summarize the last point, the master plan and the marketing study will really give us a definitive plan that can take us forward with some solid knowledge about what will be successful here. So.
Of course, we're both available for questions if you have any. I just wanted to really summarize the main point that Connie was making in regards to the market study and feasibility study. And that is, of course, it makes sense for you guys to hire whoever's doing the market study and feasibility study. But it only makes sense to do that for this big $14 million project within the process of doing a master plan. We can't do the market study and the feasibility study until we've gone through part of the master planning process and seen what it is the public wants us to build. And then we can do this market study and the feasibility study on that, on what they want us to build. Speaking of the big $14 million build project. So I just wanted you guys to understand that. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, then how does the ride park and the STO fit into that? Those pieces are just pieces the public has already said they want to build. Everyone knows they want to build them. That's why the work's already been done on them, and they're in permitting. So for instance, take the ride park. What we can build for that $775,000 are the trails itself. That's what will get built. That won't be building the parking lot next to the ride park and the bathrooms next to the ride park and the utilities for the ride park. How those other supporting elements get built will depend on the whole master plan for the park. And it will depend on, hey, are we also going to build an environmental center up there next to the ride park? Are we going to build a campground up there as well? And if we're also building those things up there, then that will impact how the bathrooms are built up there and how the parking area is built up there and all the rest of the stuff. So we know we can do the ride park and the STO now. We know it'll have a big impact in the community, but those things will have an even bigger impact once we go through an actual planning process for the whole park and do a market study around that. So I'm sorry to talk so much. I hope that's actually helpful. Yeah.
Question, if you had the 200, what is it, 275 or 775?
Yeah.
That doesn't include any parking facilities for people using the ride park?
It doesn't include parking facilities right next to the ride park.
It does.
Not right next to it.
No.
There are other parking facilities in the park, around the park, People park there just like they do now to go mountain bike out there, but then they'd have to ride from there up to the ride park. So what it doesn't include is a parking lot right at the ride park. Yeah. Any other things I can
On the
tell you?
STO, you said that logically fell into 3 possible phases.
Correct.
Off the top of your head, do you know the cost of the 3 phases?
Sorry, I didn't go back and look. You don't happen, did you look at that recently?
Well, that's all right.
Yeah, sorry, no, I don't know. But we can get that if you need it.
In all likelihood, we might not be willing or able to fund all of it, but it'd be helpful to know
Right.
what
And
phase 1 would be.
the STO also is a project that if we get funding commitment from the PFD or just funding, I'm certain that we'll be able to get some grant funding for that. As we told you at the last, or maybe not the last meeting, one of your recent meetings, that portion of trail has just been added to a nationwide trail that goes from Washington, D.C. all the way out to Neah Bay. It's been formally designated as part of that trail. So there will be federal and state grant funding available. So I don't think you'd ever be in the position of paying the whole amount.
Okay. Other questions for Cole?
Who's funding the rest of the trail outside the Heritage Park in Kitsap County then?
Oh, actually, I don't have all the answers to that. I've never asked. Different jurisdictions. So in Bainbridge is the one building that part through Bainbridge Island. I guess through most of the county, it would be the county itself building it.
They're going to link it up with the rest of the trail?
Yeah, that's the plan. It's all planned. I don't know what their timetable is for actually getting it done. For instance, a mile of this trail, the STO, was built on Bainbridge. The city of Bainbridge Island only paid 13% of the cost of that. 87% of it was covered with grant funding. Can't guarantee that here, but that's the kind of ratio that we're talking about.
Any other questions for these folks?
You mentioned the trails are in permitting. Do you have an idea when the permitting process will be
I
completed?
don't. I just asked. We had a meeting last week, and so Eric Baker with the county, he doesn't run the planning department, but he was loath to give us a date. Didn't want to make a promise on that, but probably for reasons you can understand. Yeah, so sorry, I don't. But I can track it down, and if that's important to you guys, we can try to get it. What do I think?
Yeah.
I really don't know. Yeah. Yeah, it's gone through, changes have been made, now it's back for another reviews, but if that's information that would be meaningful, I'd be happy to try to nail the county down on that.
Well, you're talking to us pretty often anyway. The next time you come, you can tell us that.
Okay, all right.
Other questions for Cole? All right.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you both. All right, we're on 7A. Oh, we were going to go back to the ILAs and whether or not we needed to sort of proceed independently on the feasibility study for each of the 3 projects instead of bending over backwards to make them all fit one template.
Does that have any feeling that that could happen? Hi.
Well, it may be that we can find a provider that does 3 different feasibility studies, and
Well, yeah,
each one has to be tailored to the project, but the provider is able to do them all.
Yeah, it
Because
depends on.
there are commonalities on all
the size and
the demographic and
capability.
economic data.
Yeah, it depends on the size and capability of the provider. I haven't done research yet on what kind of companies would have to exist in order to do that kind of work. and it may take 3 different consultants that are expert in different areas. But some of it is going to be that, as Cole has asked for, the feasibility study is after a bunch of other work is done. So his feasibility study couldn't be contracted for right now. I don't know, as I understand it, what they're asking for is going to be done partly by volunteers, partly by other organizations. And then they have to do a feasibility study based on the information that's collected. I don't know what that collection period is going to be. We would like to do a feasibility study for Port Orchard as quickly as we can get one contracted. Sounds like Heritage Park is going to be months away. Paulsbo, I didn't get a good feel from what the mayor had
You would
said.
think that Paulsbo would be very similar to the Port Orchard one.
Yeah, because they're going to go through that same public collection process before so they have enough information on which to base a feasibility study. So I think that's going to be a ways away. It looks like, well, and perhaps in the discussions that we have with the city of Port Orchard and their staff and what their expectations are on their steps, they may not prefer to have a feasibility done immediately. But if we have to have that information on which to be able to make a commitment for funding for Port Orchard, they're going to want it done instantly. We're going to want it done so that we have something we can make a decision on.
It has to pass
can
muster
make a
with the
decision
Department
on
of Commerce before we can proceed.
Yeah, I'll brief them on where we are with the projects because there are none of them that we're at the point of making commitments for bonding for construction, which is the primary thing that they're interested in. But I'll get some further refinement of what it is that they need from us to be able to make that decision.
So I'm going to request that you talk to him about all 4 of the top 4 that were.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little difficulty hearing you, so if you
Okay,
could get
so
a
I'm
little
going to request when you talk to the Department of Commerce that you talk about all 4 of the top 4 that we've got on our list, so we've got a good idea of those projects.
Well, yeah, we can certainly do that, yeah. They're already aware of the CNW process because I'd given that information preliminarily to them, and they came back and said, looks interesting, let us know when you commit to something.
Back to this, then? Yep. This is the request, the RFP
Yeah.
that you were talking about? Are we supposed to be reviewing this or fleshing this
Well,
out?
Brian hasn't looked at it, and it sounds like the consensus is that we accept the fact that, we're not going to be able to use a cookie cutter version, that there are specifics that are peculiar to each project that we're going to have to take into consideration. Everybody agree with that?
Doesn't necessarily mean that,
Yeah.
that this process or the requirements in there are not valid, but yeah, they'd have to be structured for each individual project.
Yeah. And we may be able to get one contractor to do all 3, or we may need 3 separate contractors. But I guess we're not opposed to having, different contracts with different requirements for each of the projects to fit the project.
One of the key things, though, in looking at this, if you look at the schedule, that's pretty aggressive, what I have on the last page, to get from where we are now to getting something I can actually send out as a request for proposal and a very aggressive schedule to get to somebody that's working on it by February 1st. The longer we play with what it is that we want them to do, the longer it's going to take.
Permission granted to move faster.
And this is just simply to go out and find a firm, a consultant firm or whatever, that has the ability to do more than one feasibility study that we're looking for, correct?
Yeah, it's one or more, I think.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So when we're sending this request for proposal out, we're going to Price Waterhouse or, you know, whatever the companies that have
Yeah.
everything, to see if there's companies out there that can work.
Yeah, it's not necessarily just companies in Kitsap County that
Of
are
course
going to
not,
do
no.
this. We're going to look at, you know, who
So I
are
guess
the...
my question too is, have we done any groundwork at all? Do we know who any of those companies that we could feasibly send?
Yeah, I've looked back at what was done originally back in 2002 to 2004 and the companies that were involved in doing feasibility studies at that time. And some of them are still in business, others have merged with others and so on, but some of those companies are still available. But I've also looked online at companies that do feasibility studies. Some of the material that I've used to do RFPs have come from other locations that have done that with other companies.
I have to make some comments here to just get off my chest. We don't really, if we're giving money to, if we're giving money to South Kitsap or to do their projects, and the city, the county, I don't think the Port District's going to donate much money to this or any, but land, but we don't really, I mean, they're going to do the project with what we give them. What do we care about the economic development, whether it's there or not? We're only giving money for them to do their project. And economic development is the number one thing. As I've told you before, when we went through a year-long of community desires to do the PFD, economic development was not even an issue. They wanted what they wanted for their community. And so I don't know why we're doing an economic feasibility. We're giving them money to do their project.
Well, but we want to have reasonable assurance that it's going to succeed financially.
Why? We're giving them the money to do the project.
Well, we don't want to fund a failure.
We haven't. We haven't
No,
ever.
no, we haven't. We don't want to.
I think we're wasting time.
Well, and I think the county, I mean, they want their feasibility study also.
Well, they can
it's
do it
important to
then.
them. Well, but they've asked us for the money to do it. And since we want to control it, that's the idea of us doing it.
People in South Kitsap that have been, the mayor's been over here, they want us to tell them what we can do, commit.
They've told us what they want from us. They want 12 million.
Well, I know, but how much? Bremerton only collected 7 million. Why are we going to give 12 million to this project? We don't even know if we're going to have that much money. But I think we ought to commit to South Kitsap 7 million. That's what we gave Bremerton, and they did their project.
Well, there's no connection between the two projects. I mean, why give them the same amount as Bremerton? It's a different project.
Well,
15 years apart.
Yeah, but we don't know we're going to have that money.
Well, I agree.
Tell them, all right now we'll commit 7 million, and we'll do more later if we have it. And then they can get started. I think they'd get started. We can do this. I don't like the name feasibility because it's always obviously feasible.
Well, but I mean, for me, looking at it, is I'm with what Walt said, is I don't want to invest public money into something that's not going to. So, and that's the whole point of the feasibility studies for anybody that's going to invest in these. Which is why the port and Port Orchard and everybody, they need their feasibility study also.
I think anybody that's going to participate financially is going to want to see that it's something that has a good opportunity to be successful. That's the reason we have to now have this requirement to go to the Department of Commerce because, PFD and Wenatchee, was it?
Yes, it was in Wenatchee.
Wenatchee, invested in the project and it folded.
Yeah, but then they were obligated for it. We're not going to be obligated for it if this doesn't succeed.
But if you know that it's iffy, you don't put your money in it, you put it in something that, and I'm not disparaging any of these projects. I love
Board
all of
members,
them.
I have to interrupt for 1 second. Continue your discussion, but I have to go out and lock the doors. That's part of the condition of what we're got the space. I'll be back.
None of these projects are going to fail. None of them are going to fail.
Guys want to weigh in?
We're stewards of the public money. I want it to go to the best project out there. And if one of the top ones comes back as a lot less feasible than one of the other ones,
Well, how could it not be feasible?
I don't know. One might be.
Take the Paulsville project. How could that not be feasible?
I don't know.
They own the land.
I'm not a consultant that does those.
Have a project that's.
I mean, it's
Feasibility is an
feasible
issue.
to build the project and get it off the ground, but it may not have long-term financial viability.
But if the city of Paulsbo is committed to running it, what do we care? We give them the money to do the project.
We care because we want to invest our money in something that's going to be successful over the long term.
Yeah, we want to make our best investment we can.
Well, it's going to be successful over the long term because they're going to continue to operate it.
Wenatchee wasn't.
Yes, but the problem in Wenatchee was the PFD committed to back it. We're not committing to back anything. We're just donating money, granting them money to do a project. I think you're all being way too judgmental of what Paulsville wants or what Bainbridge wants. It's not up to us to decide if what they're asking for is a good idea. It's going to be great. It's their land, their county project.
I think, I think it's public money. It is up to us as for the public to be able to say where we think it should go. Yep.
Brian.
I do not agree with that at all.
Just to add a legal perspective, the independent financial feasibility review process ties in one of the prongs into the issuance of indebtedness. So, if we're funding projects and taking on indebtedness, we have the absolute legal requirement to do these financial feasibility analyses. It's
But
not
Brian,
discretionary.
we're not taking on any indebtedness with any of these grants.
Where's the money coming from?
We get the money on
On bonds.
Yeah,
That's
we sell
indebtedness.
bonds, but then we have to pay that off. That's
The
our
PFD is stuck
indebtedness.
paying off the indebtedness.
that's right.
In effect, what the Department of Commerce does is a second feasibility study so that the state is satisfied that we're making an investment that's going to pay off, or it's not going to go belly up like
None of these projects are we obligated for, but the bonds, if we issue bonds, we will be, but the revenue we get every month more than pays our indebtedness.
That's true.
And it always will.
I think worst case
I know
scenario,
that,
Rick,
Rick, but-
is if we take on debt to fund a project, the project doesn't work, then we have 20 years to pay that debt off. I don't think, as a taxpayer, I'd be very happy about that.
They're not going to go bankrupt and go out of business. That's what happened in Wenatchee. They committed to it and they went bankrupt. But none of these projects are going to go bankrupt, and we're going to have plenty of money to pay our bonded indebtedness, whatever, because we won't take on bonds that we don't have enough revenue coming in to pay.
So you want to make a motion to give Port Orchard $7 million?
Would, but obviously I don't have another vote, but I just don't see, we're wasting time. That's what they're pissed off about. And what does it matter?
Well, we now know from what Brian said, we have to do feasibility studies. We know we're going to end up bonding one way or the other, whether it's with the county or whether we do it
Yeah,
ourselves.
but nobody is going to pay us any money to pay off our what bondedness we take in. We give them a grant, and they do this project, just like the Kingston project.
But if the project fails, the PFD is on the hook,
How's the project going to fail?
because they do. You could have another recession. Mayor Erickson was saying earlier tonight, during the recession, they couldn't meet their commitments to the Marine Science Center or something. And we had problems, I think, with the North Center not meeting commitments during the Great Recession, because remember, the school district didn't have money, and they were taking money that was set aside for fields, and they were pulling it back into their general fund to cover expenses and pay teachers. So bad stuff happens.
That didn't cause the PFD any problem. We gave them money to build that field. They built the field.
Just meant that the money wasn't there as needed to replace the field, which was a commitment they had made to us.
They committed to replace the field. We're not replacing the field.
Yeah.
Well, we're going a little bit in circles. We need to move on, okay?
And Rick, believe me, I understand what you're saying. I would like nothing more than to commit money to Port Orchard, because it has the potential to be what happened in Bremerton when the conference center was committed. There was $75 million of additional public and private money that was committed for other projects over and above what the conference center did. And I would love to see that happen for Port Orchard. But as I said earlier, in order for the PFD to make that commitment, there were 4 different feasibility studies that were done in order to satisfy the city, the PFD, and the taxpayers that buy the bonds in order to do that.
I still don't understand how this is nothing like Wenatchee, because however the project works out, we're going to pay off the bonds that we issue.
I agree.
We don't get any money back for this investment, no matter how successful it is, or isn't.
Well, we get it back if it's increasing sales tax.
Okay, let's move on, because we're not making any progress here. Mike, you have reports from the conference center and from the Parks Department?
Yeah, before that, there was the PRA request.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself.
Just to give you a heads up on that, we received the official PRA Public Records Access request from the Bainbridge Island Parks District, the government entity that is supporting the Bainbridge Island Pool Complex. They requested information on the process that we were using for evaluating projects, and what information was used to establish the ranking mechanism for ranking projects. And similarly, they were looking for communications between board members, or board members to other board members, or board members with staff on anything related to those items. This was going back to October of 2018 to the present. So we're in the process of doing that. Brian and I are working together as we did for the county PRA request. I've accumulated a lot of documents related to our process and the mechanisms that we use to do the evaluation and ranking. About to go through a search of the emails, both to and from me, and I will look at the emails that are on the server from the directors, either to me or to other directors. So expect that I will be poking in your email inboxes. If you changed your password from the one that was assigned to you at the time that we established the PFD mailboxes, please let me know. And because I will need access to your email accounts in order to do the searches for the evaluation process and the ranking process. I will need to complete that by
We gave him a date, didn't we, when we said we'd respond?
Pardon?
Did we give him a date?
I told him that it would be 4 weeks from when I responded, and I've got approximately a week and a half left. I discussed it with Brian. If I haven't completed all of that by that time, I will notify them and let them know that I can give them what I have and complete it later, or I will ask for an extension in order to complete the process and give them the submission that we're going to turn in. The other thing that Brian is doing is looking at the communications for anything that is from him or from him to the board, giving us legal advice or legal information that would be excluded from any of that submission to Bainbridge Island Parks District.
There's also an exemption for something called deliberative process. That is, if there's internal discussions going on among board members that relate to a matter of policy or decision-making that's in front of a board, those communications are protected during the time that the board is engaging in deliberations.
Seems to me we didn't establish our email, webmail process until after October of 18. Is that create a problem?
There may, if there's any issues about that, I may ask you to go back and look at your other email accounts for any emails relating to ranking of the projects or the evaluation process. So if you want to go ahead and start looking for that, because I'm sure I will.
Offend you if we wait till you ask us for it.
Can I ask where we are with the county's request? Are we all done and everything's been given to them?
Second submission on the things that they'd asked for.
That's been a while now, right?
Our second submission of the county was in the first half of June. So we've not heard from them. And
Okay.
if we haven't heard from them, that's good. Okay, we just leave it be.
So, Mike, we have reports that were in our packet from the conference center and from the Parks Department.
Basically, as I reported last month, both the fair was a very successful operation. Attendance and receipts were up 15 to 20% over previous years. So we're really happy about it. profitable literally all year long. So, we're getting bigger bookings and longer term bookings. So, at least at this point, everything is functioning the way it's supposed to and better than it has in years.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions for Mike on those two reports? All right.
The last item is announcement. There's two things. One is you have in your packet an updated timeline of the remaining meetings. And so the locations have been determined. We will be back here in Bremerton for October 28th. The big work hangar on the airport. They will also, weather permitting, do some physical groundbreaking on the site where the raceway will be.
Okay. Yes, Brian.
Can I take 2 minutes and just talk about the ILA process? Because there were some kind of comments tonight, and there's frustration about the pace. But I want to let all of you know that we are trying to move that along. So we sent out draft ILAs to Paulsbo, Port Orchard, and the county on the same day, August 20th. And we said we would love to meet with you. Mike and I are standing by. Let us know. We didn't hear from Port Orchard till September 13th. That 23 days. And during those 23 days, I reached out to their team, the development director, Nick, I think it's Nick, and the mayor, and said, hey, we're here if you want to talk. So there was no communication back from them till the 13th. They sent out their revisions and said we're coming to the next board meeting to talk to the board about it. So we've been standing by to deal with them. Port Paulsbo, same thing. We sent out the document on August 20th. We said we're standing by. We didn't hear from them for a while. I don't know if Mike reached out. I know I reached out to 3 of their people on their team and said, do you guys want to talk? We're ready. We're waiting. They said, we'll get back to you. Well, they got back to us on the 20th, so last Friday.
Which one was that?
Paulsbo.
Oh, who was the first?
They've done work. I'm not, but just the notion that I don't want you guys to feel there's any notion that we're sitting on our hands. We're proactive, and we reach out and we don't hear from them. Same thing with the county. Didn't hear from the county for a couple weeks. I kept emailing them, and finally they said, wouldn't it be better if we sat down and talked about this before we started exchanging drafts, to which we said, yes, absolutely. It's more productive if we sit down on a team basis. So the county's bringing at least 3, maybe 4 people to the meeting on Thursday. Just want you guys to know we're if people are frustrated by the pace, so far it isn't us.
I would encourage you guys, as you're having these sit-down meetings with proponents of any of the 3 projects, where if it's something you feel like you need board participation, let Darren know. We can do it. He can name a rep. We can do it with the executive committee. But we've established this meeting schedule that's stretched out a little more than it was during the summer when we were meeting more frequently, and so. We may need to do things with the executive committee in between times so that it doesn't bog down.
That would be appreciated, because again, getting something like the Port Orchard document, which was such a radical departure from where I thought we were, just to come forward and say $12 million and taking out a lot of the termination things we have.
Yeah, and I'm sure, we'll cooperate and.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, when we have these meetings, or at least when they reach out, representatives from those areas, whether it's South Kitsap or Port Orchard, to sit on those meetings, because it's going to be in your territory, in your district.
Thank you.
So we don't get a quorum at those meetings.
Yes.
Right.
All right, I have two things. In the minutes of the last meeting, we talked about at that meeting, we had heard from Alan, our financial advisor, about the total cash flow we could expect over the 24 years was $47 million. That was at a 3% growth rate, and we asked to have what the number would be at a 2% growth rate. Did he give us that?
Yes, and I did send those out.
Or remind me what the number was?
Were they on an email, you mean? I'm wondering.
How much was it? All right. And then the last thing, and I'll ask the rest of the board members if they have anything. Are we doing anything with the county commissioners over getting together again about this who's going to bond issue?
And after we met with them, they said that they would consider that, and they would sit down and talk with their financial people, the treasurer, and their financial advisor, and get back to us. They have not gotten back to us, so we need to follow up and find out.
You'll pull their chain again. Comments, questions from the rest of the board members before we adjourn?
I have a question. Figure 43 million was set out. But if we go issue a bond issue or go into bonds, we're not going to have 43 million. What do we make out of that information?
I think what Darren was trying to determine, that if we are able to sell a certain amount of bonds based on either our individual capacity or in conjunction with the county, it's going to be a number. Let's say it's $15 million. He was interested in looking at how much money up until 2041 is the PFD going to receive, to look at how much money over and above what's committed to the debt that we need to repay that would be available for other projects in the future. Because he was concerned that we spend all the money now, then we can't do anything else in the future. We're looking at whatever that cushion is between what we'll receive and what we're committed to pay.
I'm just noticing that having that figure caused the mayor to think, oh, well, we're only asking for 19 or 12 or whatever. That's only 25% over. Or
Well, and I think Darren also wants to investigate, what if we don't sell any bonds at all, or only a smaller amount of bonds? The other public partners sell bonds, and we commit to help them pay their
I understood
bond service.
that's
How
where
much
that-
money do we have to assist with that?
Now that makes sense. That's where that figure. But
And that's what Port Orchard put in.
Port Orchard actually
task
put that
six.
in their
Yeah.
document, an option to have them sell the bonds, and we assist them in debt service.
Yeah, and also the CEO of Kitsap Bank said that he would be willing to sit down with us and discuss funding and financing options in regard to their project. And we need to do that. There's only so many hours in the day, and RA request has eaten up more of my time. Contact the mayor and the CEO of Kitsap Bank and find out if we can sit down and talk.
During the break, I went out, introduced myself to the mayor, and said, I want to meet with you as soon as possible. Okay, so we're trying to, again, move this along.
Appreciate your efforts, because, like I say, we don't want to admire this problem for 6 more months before we, pass out some money. I think it's important for people to see visible progress in this process.
And I did do some discussions with Darren about a schedule for meetings for next year. He wanted to continue in the rotation with different sites in order to get the BCAT recordings of our meetings. I've given him a tentative schedule. So at the October meeting, you will get a preliminary or a proposed meeting schedule that basically is meeting every month, but still keeping the end of October and early part of December rather than keeping a monthly schedule through October, November, and December. I offered to move those dates up a week, so we're meeting on the 3rd Monday instead of the 4th Monday. He wasn't necessarily in favor of that, but that's something that we can discuss at the next meeting.
Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.